For this week, we have the readings from Exodus 9:13 to chapter 11, where we finish reading about the final plagues of Egypt. Beginning in verse 13, we read, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Rise up early in the morning.'" Which I love, because when did something great get done after somebody slept in past their alarm? Just rise up, get up early. So he says, rise up early, and he tells Moses to inform Pharaoh that the Lord will rain down thunder and hail. Then in verse 20 it says, those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried their slaves and livestock off to a secure place. In the world, and especially in America, we have a huge, I would say, spiritually national problem called the moralistic therapeutic deism. Essentially, this line of thinking lacks the fear of the Lord. So we'll go through each of those terms one by one. It's moralistic in the sense that people believe that just good people go to heaven. You just have to be good. That's all. Whatever good means. It's therapeutic in the sense that when I want God, he's there. I can use him to make me happy. I can ask things of him, but when I don't want him meddling in my life, I put him back on the shelf. Because sometimes people treat God like a life coach or a cheerleader, like, oh God, I have this crush on Susie. I'm gonna go pursue her. God, can you be my wingman? Help me out. Or like, I'm just complaining, life is so hard. God, I just need a pick me up or something. And you only view God as someone who is always going to support your decisions and never ask you to change or stop doing something or ask anything of you. And that's a very dangerous view of God. Finally, the deistic nature, how people perceive God, that he doesn't really care about your decisions, that he's just uninvolved, he's distant. Besides, I just want you all to believe in me. I just want you all to be good people. He doesn't really care about anything else that we do. He doesn't really care about like how often we're good, or like what denomination you're in, how you treat your parents, when you pray, how often you pray, how you worship. Just it's like God could care less about these nitty-gritty things that we find. He really just wants you to just, believe in him. That's all. Like the rest of your life, do whatever you want. So we ask ourselves so often, what does it mean to fear the Lord then? We see what it's not like, and I think that it just simply means to take God seriously. Look at the Egyptian officials. It said that they feared the word of the Lord and then heeded the Lord's instruction by obeying and doing it. The fear of the Lord is simply to obey him and just to take seriously what he says. It's not just to simply obey him, but also take seriously what would happen if we don't obey him, which the Egyptian officials knew. Their livestock, their servants, everything that was in the field would just be destroyed. Now, that falls short when we've been lied to about this by our spiritual leaders and what the Lord asks of us. Because if your pastor or your priest tells you, the Lord just wants you to be happy, he's not asking you to work on your sin or anything. He doesn't actually want you to be free from sin right now. It's blah, blah, blah. Then that's not good, because then there is nothing to fear about the Lord. That's one reason why once saved, always saved makes literally no sense. What's there to fear if I am always saved from here on out? I guess the fear that I was never saved in the first place, but then that becomes a belief that is self-defeating. But let's read what Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 25. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." And all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So this parable, contrary to many poor theologians or spiritual leaders, in which some of them believe it's about generosity. How could the 5 bridesmaids, the wise bridesmaids, not share their oil? How selfish of them. Well, maybe the oil represents something that they couldn't share, even if they wanted to. Think about it this way, if I study for an exam, and you're like, "Dude, I didn't get to study last night. Help me out." It's like, I can't impart my memory onto you. I can't just I can't impart my efforts that I studied for this exam and then just share that with you. Like, that's impossible. So you see, the oil represents virtues one cultivates and the relationship of God that one has and has grown. And the foolish ones have none. And we know that this is what the oil represents, because what's the master's response to the foolish ones when they do show up with oil? It says, I don't know you. And you look at them at the very end of the age, when the bridegroom actually comes, which is Jesus, they go out and they try to do last minute virtue signaling, I guess, or last minute just trying to add in some prayers and try to create a relationship quick. But God looks at them and he goes, I don't know you. I think about it this way: Jesus is the one person in all of Scripture that talks about hell the most. I mean, you know how many times he says like statements such as like, then you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven, or I was hungry and you didn't feed me, or they will be thrown out into the darkness with the gnashing of teeth. And these are all very graphic descriptions, and they are uncomfortable descriptions, and we've sort of let the society trick us into making us think, like, just be an okay person. Hopefully you do a good thing when it's most convenient for you, but God also doesn't really care what you do as long as you just believe in him. He's got your back. I mean, whatever you want to do with your life, he's there. And you see how that lacks the fear of the Lord. I mean, that's a breeding ground for the devil to come in. And so what does God need to do when our lives are so out of order? He needs to cleanse us. He needs to sterilize our hearts until there's nothing left in order to rebuild. So what happens next? God sends locusts in the next plague. And in chapter 10, verse 15, it reads, "They, the locusts, covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was black. And they ate all the plants of the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Nothing green was left, no tree, no plant in the field, in all the land of Egypt." Now think about this. If you need to be cleansed by the Lord, your heart needs to be sterilized. What is currently growing in your heart? Probably mostly things that are based upon concupiscence, which is our desire for sin, our natural desire towards sin. So it's probably false idols in your life. It's probably distractions. It's probably things that are still gripping you, habitual sins or bad habits. These are seeds that have been planted by the devil. They haven't been pulled out by you in spiritual practice. So they've been allowed to grow freely and take root in your heart. So what needs to happen? God sends locusts to just devour everything that's there, because what's there is not good. And then what happens after all of this is purged? The plague of darkness comes, because when one hardens their heart after sinning again, like Pharaoh does, even after everything is purged, the only thing God has left is to remove himself, which is light. I mean, God is light. This is so that we can truly recognize what is absent in our life. Because if God is always present, there's always going to be some type of light. At some point, God needs to wake us up and we get comfortable with the light. And so when God removes himself, there's darkness. And that's truly when we realize how desolate it is when we're away from God. So what is Pharaoh's sin? It's pride. It's the need for control. And we see that God, which is truth and wisdom and beauty, cannot coexist with someone who seeks to control everything. In Plato's Republic, Plato uses an analogy. He describes the true philosopher as a spouse of wisdom, but through one of the characters in the dialogue in the character's own day, philosophy has fallen on hard times, because those who ought to have married wisdom have not, and have left her to be abused by boyfriends who sneak in and impregnate her and have her raise bastardized children. We see something similar in Proverbs 31, where the woman is the embodiment of Lady Wisdom, as God's wisdom, the ideal wife. Look for her and marry her and enter into a covenant relationship with her. Ultimately, it's a representation of Christ and his covenant with us. And you want to enter into that relationship, but you can't control her because it's a relationship. Think about it this way. You cannot treat truth and wisdom like a prostitute. While you can hire her for a time and use her until she begins to demand something from you, you then leave her to the curb and abandon her. You see, we like truth when it helps us get what we want. We like it when it makes us feel right, when it makes us feel empowered over people. But the moment it demands something of us, the moment it demands us to change, to live differently, we toss it to the curb as if it was never there to begin with. And then we attempt to seek out different ideologies and philosophies to satisfy our primeval desires. And so what is the opposite of control? It's surrender. And is it surrender of some? No, it's surrender of all. In Exodus chapter 10, verse 26, it reads, "You must let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings to sacrifice to the Lord our God," said Moses. "Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must choose some of them for the worship of the Lord our God. We will not know what to use to worship the Lord until we arrive there." You see, Moses isn't going to choose premeditatively that he will sacrifice, let's say, 5 cows, 2 sheep, 1 ram, but instead he's going to bring everything he has to the foot of Mount Sinai. Because what if the Lord asks of him 10 rams, no cows, 5 sheep? Pope Benedict XVI said that the purpose of the people being freed in the first place was to worship God and to give him true worship, the worship that God asks. And what is that worship? What's that worship for us? I mean, that's the worship for them back then, but what about now? What's the one thing God asks of us? What does Jesus ask of us? Well, Jesus, he took bread in his holy and venerable hands, with eyes raised to heaven. He said the blessing and gave the bread to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you." So now what? As we round the corner to chapter 12, which will be the first Passover instituted, I would just ask that we prepare ourselves, not just to read this next passage for next week, but to ask ourselves, what does the Lord ask of me today? And if I haven't done it yet, do I fear the Lord? Do I take him seriously? Do I take his punishment seriously? Because he takes you very seriously. I mean, serious enough to come down, incarnate himself, break his own body for you, to eat it, and then die on the cross for your sins so that you may experience an eternity with him. Don't let your desire for control or pride get in the way of fully surrendering your whole being unto him. God has taken you seriously. Now, will you take him seriously?